Okay, I guess we'll go ahead and get started then. So in today's session, I'm going to be taking you through a spouse client file from start to finish, and it's going to be a really open-ended session. So if you have any questions along the way, feel free to either just unmute yourself and jump in with your question, or you can send it to the Zoom chat if that's easier. So hopefully everyone can see my screen. This is the screen that you first get to when you log into the system, and it's going to list all the different clients that you've added in. To add a new client, you're just going to go up to the Add button and then enter in the client's first name and last name. Those are the key fields that are required in order to add the client to the system. Middle name is optional. Email is there if you want to send the client the online questionnaire. So you'd put in their email, you'd click this Use Questionnaire box, and then when you add the client to the system, you're going to be able to choose whether you want to send the questionnaire directly from eState Planner, or if you want to send it, like copy a special link that you can send to the client from your own email. And that way you can sort of customize the email a bit more. So you've got those two options. And then once the client receives the link and they click on it, they're going to be prompted to create a password, just so that their information stays secure and so that they don't have to do it all in one sitting. They can come back into it. And then they go through it and enter in their profile, family tree, asset and debt information. And anything they put into that online questionnaire is going to automatically populate back into your system. So it's going to save a lot of time from manual entry if you're going to use the online questionnaire. But you don't have to use it. So if you have your own questionnaire that you like to use, or if you like to collect the information with them in the client meeting, then just don't worry about putting in the email and don't click the Use Questionnaire box. And then you can just add the client in normally. Now today, since we're doing a spouse client file, this means that we want to generate documents for both spouses. And so we have to add them both as separate clients into the system, and then we can link them together with the spouse client function. So you just go up to the Add button. We're going to add in Lauren, the spouse. And then the key field here is this spouse client. So you click on it and you pick the name of the first spouse. So you can only do this when you're adding the second spouse into the system, because the first spouse already needs to be into the system so that you'll be able to choose them from the drop-down list here. And basically what this spouse client function does is it links them together so that any joint asset information and the shared family tree information will automatically populate in both of their profiles. And then if it's going to be more of a mirror will situation, you've also got the option to sync the scenarios and appointments so that you don't have to do the same planning twice. Then you just pick who you want to start with. So I'm going to pick Ben. And this is what you're going to be brought to first on the People tab. So you're going to start with the client and the spouse. The client is always going to be surrounded with a black circle, and anyone else on the family tree will be with a blue circle if you have selected them. So usually what I like to do first is edit the client's information. So you can do that by just double clicking on the icon. It's going to bring up the details. Really, for anyone that you're adding to the family tree, the key fields are first name, last name, and gender, just so that the wording of the will comes out properly. Date of birth, you can just type it in this field. You can pick it from the calendar as well, but I find it easier to just type it in. And the age will automatically populate. Country of birth, you can pick a country, you can do citizenship. All this other information, this is just for investigative purposes to make sure you've got all this key information on your client, but it's not going to affect the generation of the will itself. Then residency, it's important because however the province is set here is how the system's going to know what precedents to generate for the will. And it's also going to be how the system knows how to calculate the probate tax on the Assets tab. The city field's also important because it will populate in the will. So it'll say Ben Collins of the City of Toronto. Special circumstances for the client is a place where you could note any potential capacity issue. So you would just click on the box and you could write a description in below. So you want to make sure this stuff is really well documented in case there will be a will challenge down the line. And the last thing is just relationships, and it's just going to list all the other people the client's related to. And this is the section where if you ever enter in someone incorrectly, like you enter in a sibling as a child for whatever reason, you can use this relationship section to fix the relationship so that you don't have to delete them and re-add them. So you can just sort of edit their relationship here and add it under the correct relationship. But for anyone else that you're adding to the family tree, you want to make sure to use this add button instead. And the way it works is whatever icon you're clicked on, whatever sort of circle is bolded around the icon, that's the individual that you're adding to. So right now the icon is bolded, the circle is bolded around Ben. So I'm going to be adding to Ben. I'm going to go and add a child. Whenever you're adding a child, you're going to get this prompt as to who the other parent is. If it's the current spouse, if it's a new parent, so an ex-spouse that is going to be involved in the will, so you want to add them in, or single parent. So either there's an ex-spouse, but they're not going to be involved in the will, so you don't need to add them to the family tree, or they're genuinely a single parent. But let's just say it's Lauren. Then you can enter in the child's information, John Collins, July 8th. And then the special circumstances section for anyone that's not the client is a place where you can sort of note relationship difficulties or estrangement to the client, and also, most importantly, disability. So if the individual is disabled, then you're going to want to make sure this box is checked off, because later on, if you're trying to create a fully discretionary trust to the death of the beneficiary, and the individual is marked as disabled on the People tab, then it's going to draft a special Henson Trust clause in the will. So this is the key trigger here. Let's say we wanted to add a grandchild. So you can't add a grandchild directly to the client. It works through direct relationships. So what you have to do is add a child to the client, click on the child's icon, and add a child to the child. Let's just say he's a single parent. And then you can enter in the grandchild's information and add her in. Same kind of thing for nieces and nephews. You would click on the client's icon, you would add a sibling to the client, then you would click on the sibling's icon and you would add a child to the sibling. If there's going to be anybody else involved in the will in either a beneficiary or a trustee capacity, but they don't fit on the family tree, either because they're not family or they're just really distantly related, you can go to this All People tab. So it's going to list everyone that you've added into the system. And this is the place where you can add in individuals that aren't family. So you just go to the add button. Let's say Jordy's going to be involved in this will later on. So we'll just add him in here. And so after you add in all the details, it's going to ask you about the relationship. So who's Jordy related to? He's related to Ben. What's the relationship? He's a friend of Ben's. And then we'll add him in here. And so that is sort of the people section. Does anyone have any questions so far? Nope. Okay, we'll keep going. So the next section is assets. Oh, yep, go ahead. We have a question. Yes. So if you do send, so the question was, can this information come straight from the intake form? And so if you do send the client the online questionnaire, they're going to put in all of their family tree, asset, debt information, and it will automatically populate back into your system. So once they filled out the questionnaire and you go into the client's file, you'll be able to see everything that they put in. So you'll see the family tree that they built and all the information that they put in for all of the family members. The only thing you can't do in the questionnaire right now is add people that aren't family. So this would need to be done on your end as the lawyer later on during the meeting. The next section is assets. So this is where you're going to add in all the client's assets that they have, just to give them a sense of what the net value of their estate's looking like. You're always going to start with the general personal effects, just to remind you to gift it as an initial gift, so that it's going to trigger a special disposition of personal effects clause. For any other asset, you're just going to go up to the add button and then pick your sort of type and your category and then your type. So we're going to start with a bank account. And asset name is really the key field here, because it's how the asset's going to be identified throughout the system and in the will if it's going to be a specific asset request. So I usually like to change all the information and put it right in this asset name field here. So that way, if I'm adding in multiple bank accounts, I can differentiate that this is the RBC bank account, the other one's the CIBC savings account, and I know that I'm planning for the correct asset. Balance, you don't have to put a balance or a value in, but if you do, it'll automatically calculate the probate tax for you. And then we'll just add this one in. So really for the assets tab, the only assets that you'd need to add in are specific asset requests that are going to be appearing in the will. But for planning purposes, you can add in all of the client's assets and give them values and give them a sense of what their whole estate's looking like. Let's add a couple more. So we'll go for real estate, home. Again, maybe they've got multiple homes. You can change it. Maybe this is the family home. The address field, if it is going to be a specific asset request, it will populate in the will. Current value, let's say it's $1 million. So you have this mortgage/encumbrances field here. And if there's a mortgage on the property, you're going to want to put the value of the mortgage in here. There's also an opportunity to add in a mortgage on the debts tab, but best practice is if it's associated with the specific asset that you're adding into the system, just add it in this field and not on the debts tab. Because adding it in here, it's good to know what asset the debt is associated with, and also it has an effect on how much probate tax is calculated for this asset. The one thing you want to make sure you're not doing is adding it in both places. So don't add it in as a value here and as a separate debt on the debts tab. Just add it in once, best practice in here. Ownership, you can change it to if it's joint, if it's tenants in common. Let's say it's jointly owned with more than the spouse. Let's go for one more. We'll go for an RSP. So again, I like to put all the identifying information right in that asset name field. The beneficiary field, this is just whoever the current beneficiary is on the policy, and it's strictly for information purposes. So later on, you can decide if you want to change the beneficiary or confirm the beneficiary in the will. Current value, let's say it's $100,000. So the probate tax always calculates for you automatically, but the income tax doesn't. And this is just due to the variability of different clients' tax brackets. So what we usually like to do is sort of estimate the income tax. So if it's something like an RRSP, we put in 50% of it. If it's an asset with a capital gain, we would do like 25% of that gain, just to show a client sort of the highest possible tax that it could incur. So that's the Assets tab. Any questions here? Oh, okay, we'll keep going. Next is debts. This is really more for planning. You just click on Add Debt. We're not going to put in a mortgage because we already did on the Assets tab, and we don't want to double count it. But let's just say they have a credit card debt, $5,000. Then you get to scenarios, and this is really where all of the planning occurs. And the idea is that you plan for each one of these scenarios so that you're covering your bases no matter what happens. So you start with surviving spouse. This is the plan if the spouse is still alive when the client passes away. Then you go to descendants only. This is the plan if the spouse is gone, but there's still kids or grandkids around. And then no descendants. So there's no spouse, no kids, no grandkids. This is like your ultimate disaster. What's happening? And there's two ways you can go about planning for the scenarios. You can do it manually by clicking into a scenario and going through the different sections. So the first section is the joint designated assets section. So this is where you're going to put anything that's joint or designated to another individual to show that it's falling outside of the estate. Initial gifts, this is where you're going to create specific asset bequests or cash legacies. And then the balance of the estate is how you're dividing up the residue, either by adding segments and gifts within the segment, if it's a more complicated residue breakdown, or by running a macro, if it matches one of our already pre-populated residue breakdowns. So you could do it manually, but if you're dealing with a typical client file, where it's like everything to spouse, everything to kids, that kind of thing, then a faster way to do it is to go to this little lightning bolt, which we call ePlans. And it's basically like a giant macro that goes through all of the scenarios and appointments and creates a plan for you according to the details of whichever ePlan you choose. And the nice thing about it is, even if your client's plan isn't an exact match for one of these ePlans, you can still run it, and then you can go into each scenario and appointment and change the details so that it ultimately matches what you're wanting to create, but that way you're not having to start from scratch. So I'm going to do this last ePlan, and we're still in the surviving spouse scenario. In the joint designated assets section, it's got the RRSP and the family home going to Lauren, the spouse, to show that it's falling outside of the estate. Initial gifts, you've got the general personal effects, and it's going to Lauren. And this is going to allow the general personal effects clause to generate in the will. So there'll be a special clause talking about the disposition of personal effects. And then the balance of the estate. So if you ever want to see the details, you just click on segment 1 and then you click on the gift. And it's showing us the residue is going to Lauren, absolute 100%. There's no gift over because that second scenario, descendants only, is going to be the gift over. So you don't have to put anything in here. So I didn't have to change anything. The ePlan did exactly what I wanted to for this scenario. So I'll just move to the next one, descendants only. Nothing that's joint or designated. The initial gifts, the general personal effects, are now going to the children. Let me just show you how you do this manually. So for any specific asset bequest, you're just going to drag and drop the asset from the side to the green box. Then you can choose your beneficiaries. If it's a people, if it's a person or a class, you can do class of children. And then for personal effects specifically, whenever you're gifting to more than one person, you're going to have the option to specify the distribution method. If you want maybe the trustee's discretion or as beneficiaries agree, you can do multiple. And for the balance of the estate, I'm going to click again on the bar and then the bar again to see the details. It's going to the class of children in trust, 100%, same as trustees as executors. The duration when the beneficiary reaches age 30, I want it to be 25 instead. And mandatory payments, I want at 21, they get 25%. Unlimited discretion, gift over first to beneficiaries issue, then to other class members, so the other children. And I'll just save. So now I've worked off the ePlan, but I've ultimately created the residue breakdown that I wanted to create with the trust and the details that my client wanted. So it saved me some time that way. And if I want to copy these details for this scenario over to Lauren's profile, I just use this little spouse sync button. And what it will do is it'll copy the residue breakdown, anything that's joint, over to Lauren's profile. The only thing it's not going to copy over are solely owned assets because it wouldn't be her asset to give away. And then we'll go to the last scenario, no descendants. So the ePlan is half to siblings, half to spouses siblings. But technically, maybe I have a big family, lots of grandkids. I don't think I'm ever going to get this far, I don't necessarily have to plan for this scenario. I can just clear it and leave it at that. But I also can plan for this scenario. So let's say I wanted to leave half to Jordy and half to a charity. I'm going to start by creating a segment for 50% since I want to make 2 segments. And now I have to specify what I'm doing with this 50%, and I do that by adding a gift. So I choose Jordy as my beneficiary, absolute 100%. This means 100% of the 50% segment. So I don't want to divide up this 50% even further. I want all of this 50% to go to Jordy. Then gift over to beneficiary's issue, and I'll add. So if I look at the green circles, I can see of this outer 50%, I've dealt with 100% of it. So I don't want to be adding any more gifts. What I want to do is deal with the other 50%. And I do that by going back to segments and adding a second segment for 50%. I'll add a gift. This time I'm going to do a charity. And if you search it in the search bar, it'll search the CRA database for you. So it'll have sort of the CRA number and everything associated with it that will populate in the will. So I'm going to choose Epilepsy Toronto as my charity, absolute, 100%, and I'll add that in. So now of this 50%, I've dealt with everything, and therefore I've dealt with 100% of the residue. And I can sync it over to Lauren too, if she would want the same plan. So that's scenarios. I know that can be kind of a lot to digest, but does anyone have any questions here? No? Okay. So the next section is appointments. This is where you're going to appoint your estate trustees and your guardians if you need to. So because we read the E-plan, it's already made the spouse the primary estate trustee. But to add anyone else, you're just going to go to the Add button. You can do people or trust corporations, and their specific trust clauses will populate in the will. And I'm going to choose Jordy as the next appointee. And condition, this is the key thing. This either makes them a primary or an alternate. So if you choose none, that'll make them a primary. If you choose a condition, it'll make them an alternate. And usually the condition I use is if all specified cannot act, and then I make sure the name on the specified line is correct. Now it's going to read Lauren. If Lauren can't act, Jordy. If I wanted to do a further alternate, we'll just do the same condition, but I would change the specified to Jordy. So now it's going to read Lauren if Lauren can't, Jordy if Jordy can't, John. And I can sync with the spouse sync button. And the last thing we're going to go over today is provision. So there's a couple of different things here. The first is funeral arrangements. So if you want those in the will, just type it on the line. If not, just get rid of this text and there won't be a body disposition clause in the will. Include future members is if you want future members included in the definition of a class in the will. So this is if you're using class gift, like in the second scenario, we use the class gift of children. If I check this box, it's going to define children as John Collins and any other child born to or adopted by me and my spouse. So you only have to worry about this if you're using class gifts in the will. If you're not gifting to any of these specific classes, it doesn't matter if they're checked off or not. Class restrictions, same kind of thing. You can restrict certain members being part of a class. Trust for beneficiaries under a certain age is your general trust clause. It's going to guide underage beneficiaries that you haven't set up specific trusts for. So if it goes to like a grandchild through a gift over and they're underage, they'll follow this general clause. And secondary will assets, this is if you're doing multiple wills, so primary and secondary corporate wills, then you can pick and choose which definitions you want included in the secondary will. So if you're just doing a single will, you don't have to check or uncheck anything, it won't have any effect. Then up in the top corner, we have this little exclamation point in the circle. And these are what we call advisor insights. So they're basically like contextual alerts that help you with the planning and make sure you're not missing anything important. So Some of them will always be here, like request prior wills and powers of attorney. Some will go away if you go and fix the problem, like if I go and put in a gender for Lauren. But the main thing is just to sort of review them to make sure you've considered them everything, and you can be more confident in your plan that way. Beside this is just notes. You can make notes on the client here, and these notes populate at the end of the text summary. And then the last button is this generation button, where you're going to generate your documents and your summary. So first of all, there's 3 summaries. There's the profile. It's going to give you all the information that the clients filled out in their questionnaire or that you filled out for them on their behalf. So it's got all the profile information, all the details of all the family members and people that have been added to the system, and all the asset and debt details as well. The next is the graphic scenario summary. So it's going to give you a nice visual representation of the will for each of the scenarios. And if you're adding in values on the assets tab, it's going to look a lot nicer and give you a better sense of what's going where and how much is in the estate at this point in time. And the last one is the text scenario summary. It's going to give you a nice sort of all of the details of all of the details of the will and the POAs and who the trustees are and how you divided up the residue and what gifts you created. It's like the will without the legalese. It's just got all the details in more of a digestible format. So those are the 3 summaries. Then you've got documents. These are all the different documents you can generate with the system. Today we're going to do single will. You have to check these 2 boxes. And then the signing date, you can change it. You can take it out completely and manually put it in the will later. Registered asset designation is if you want to confirm or do new designations for the registered assets in the will. Joint designated asset confirmation is something that says anything that's joint is truly intended to be joint, not held in a resulting trust. Counterpart is if you're signing counterpart. Simplified is a shorter will with less definitions and powers. The will guides a nice little chart at the end of the will that guides the client to the different sections and different clauses. And a cover page is just a cover page. For witnesses, you can choose anyone who's a user on your account, or you can choose the blank box and you can manually put their information in the will. And you can also generate your affidavits as well. Then you just click generate in the bottom corner, and it's going to give you a Word doc that's fully editable, so you can make any changes that you want. I'll just go through it quickly. Funds and plans, this is if you click that registered asset box. Assets passing outside of the will is if you click that joint asset box. There's some definitions. My children means John and any other child born to or adopted by, because we checked that future children box on the provisions tab. There's our appointments, Lauren if not Lauren, Jordy, not Jordy, John. Here's our funeral arrangement. Here's a special personal effects clause that generates when you gift the general personal effects as an initial gift. And then the residue to Lauren, if not to Lauren, this trust for the children, and ultimately half to Jordy, half to Epilepsy Toronto. And if we scroll all the way down, we'll get to the nice little will guide that guides to the different clauses in the will. So that's how you go through it. One other thing that I want to point out is this little question mark up in the top corner. So if you click on it, it's going to bring you over to our help desk where there's lots of articles on how to do different things in the system. There's also courses. So specifically the Estate Planner Certification course. Right here's the link to it. And it's a course, it's a self-paced course, free, that will take you through planning a will from start to finish with Estate Planner. So it'll really help you get to learn the system better. And I'd recommend checking it out if you're trying to learn the system better and get to know the ins and outs of the program. But that sort of wraps it up for today. Does anyone have any final questions before we go? No? Well, if you do have any questions later on, don't hesitate to reach out. You can email me directly. You can email support. We're always happy to jump on a Zoom and help you through it. But thanks again for joining me today, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.